Alabama's roster is getting absolutely decimated right now, and Florida State has certainly done their fair share of that decimation. Reports say that up to 26 current players have already hit the transfer portal. Florida State's picked up a handful of those in the portal this cycle, and other teams are absolutely running roughshod on the Crimson Tide. But is this a problem? Is this something that needs to be fixed within college football? I want to talk about that and talk about why Alabama's in this situation and why college football doesn't need to change anything about it. There's a bunch of hot takes and there's a bunch of controversy around, oh man, should rules be changed? Should this happen? Should that happen? Honestly, I'll give you the spoiler alert now. I don't think anything should happen with this. I think these are the rules, and this is ultimately what college football is today. And Alabama and those close to Alabama put themselves in this situation. And so the idea of changing rules to once again benefit Alabama over everyone else seems ludicrous to me. Obviously, Florida State has picked up a ton from the Crimson Tide, from Earl Little Jr., Roydell Williams, Terrence Ferguson, and others on their last year's roster. And they're not done. You think about Malik Benson, you think about Sean Murphy, and that's 5 Crimson Tide players. They've also picked up a commitment from Alabama, a kid who was committed to Alabama and now is with the Noles, and they're looking pretty good for another who decommitted recently as well. But why is this happening? Well, this is happening because Nick Saban decided to retire after the college football season. He decided to retire after kids had already enrolled in school, and ultimately, this falls at his feet. It's a one-off scenario. This is not something that's going to happen all the time. And there are folks asking for the rules to be changed and saying, oh, because this hurt Alabama, this is why we should change the rules. When the rules have always been this. If your coach leaves, you get a 30-day window to enter the portal. That's not new. That's not news. But because of the way that Saban left and because of the timing of when Saban left, which was intentional, it is hurting Alabama more than maybe it would have. But whose fault is that? Whose fault is it that that is what's taking place? Well, it's Nick Saban's. It's Alabama's. Nick Saban is the one who decided to retire when he did. Nick Saban is the one who decided to wait until kids were already enrolled for the spring semester before he announced his retirement. He very easily could have said that he was retiring earlier in the year. He certainly could have said, hey, I'm probably going to retire after this season. I'm probably going to call it quits after this year. Could have done that at any point. Could have done that early in the year. Could have done that in the preseason. Could have done that after winning the SEC championship. Could have done that before the playoff. But he decided to wait. Why did he decide to wait? Well, number one, he decided to wait because he wanted to make sure that the kids committed to him and that Alabama was set up with one more major recruiting class. He also wanted to make sure that those kids actually got to campus. They actually enrolled. And so he announced it after the semester had started. Whose fault is that? I don't think it's anyone's fault. But can you blame kids for wanting out? Kids enrolled in classes this spring. Kids committed and signed with Alabama with an expectation that Nick Saban was going to be there. And he's not now. And that's no one's fault but their own. If Saban had announced back in September, hey, this is going to be my final ride. If Saban announced in December, hey, this SEC championship game will be my last. This playoff is going to be my last. Kids would have known. Their roster wouldn't be going through what it's going through right now because kids would have been aware. He could have used that month to prepare them, but he didn't. He waited until they were enrolled. He waited until after signing day. He waited until after the national championship. If it had been known earlier, kids could have made that decision earlier. And maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't have. But Alabama would not be the only one with a roster issue at this moment. Alabama would be able to replenish their roster because other rosters would have been open as well. People are saying there needs to be a rules change. People are saying we need to flip this. Again, I think this is a one-off scenario. You had a legend retire. an elite roster, and a playoff run all coming together at the same time. How often does that happen? Well, how often do you have somebody with Nick Saban's status retiring? Not very often. How many times do you have someone with the number 1 overall class retiring before they even get into their second week of school? Not very often. How often do you have somebody who makes a college football playoff and competes in that retiring? Not very often, let alone to have all 3 of them at the same time. We don't need to make a rules change in college football because of one-off scenario. Just because Florida State and the rest of college football is absolutely decimating what Nick Saban's roster is, it doesn't mean that we need to change everything up just for the benefit of the Crimson Tide. Washington had to go through the same thing. Arizona's going through the same thing. If Harbaugh scoots off to the NFL, they'll go through the same thing as well. Changing the rules just for Alabama seems off, but there's a bigger part to all of this, and it was pointed out on social media. And I'll talk about it as soon as I give Rapid SEO Host a little bit of love. We've told you about them for a couple of months now. They specialize in high-speed, SEO-focused WordPress hosting. Breaking that down, if you have a WordPress website, or if you need a website for your business and you want it to show up higher in search engine results, Rapid SEO Host will optimize your site so that it is lightning fast. If you're in a competitive business, which, let's be honest, who isn't? You need every advantage to beat the competition, and Rapid SEO Host is here to help you do that. They're efficient. They offer a hands-off approach. They will migrate your current website if you're switching from one of those big-name hosting sites. They're noles just like you and I are. If you need their services, make sure to let them know that TJ sent you. All of their info is in the description, and you can get access to it there. Rapid SEO Host, I appreciate them for their support. The biggest part of all of this, and the funniest part to me, is that Alabama refuses to take the bad with the good. What's the bad? The bad is what they're going through right now with their roster and the fact that it is being decimated. The good? They got a playoff run that they absolutely did not deserve this year. They got to go to the college football playoff while Florida State sat at home, and what they're getting right now is paying the price for it. Ball don't lie, as Rasheed Wallace used to say, and that's what's happening now. You were fine with controversy. You were fine with unprecedented. You were fine when they put you into the playoff over an undefeated Florida State team. You were fine when you trotted your running back out there in Jalen Milroe to throw for less yardage than Florida State's third stringer had against Georgia in their playoff game, in their bowl game, But now you're not okay with the way that your roster is getting torn apart. If the committee had done the right thing, and we won't rehash that fully, but if the committee had done the right thing and put Florida State in and left Alabama out, like what should have happened, I know that would have certainly hurt the SEC's feelings. Saban would have retired in December. All of this would have been done and over with and finished. But he didn't do that. That didn't happen. And so what ended up going down? Alabama got the benefit of the playoff, but they don't want to take the penalty of the coach leaving after the season. So it's a little bit ironic. It's a little bit hilarious to see. I saw another tweet about how they complained for a month that Florida State fans needed to just let it go. Florida State fans cried for change. Florida State fans cried for things to be corrected for a month after the playoff snub. Maybe even still now, I'm still talking about it. But as soon as Alabama's screwed, as soon as Alabama is hurt by a rule in college football, all of a sudden things need to change. All of a sudden there's Bama outcry. All of a sudden the rules are not right. The rules are not good enough. At the end of the day, this is the way that college football is set up. At the end of the day, this is the way that our rules have been organized. If coaches can get up and go and leave and do what's best for them, then players should be allowed to do the same thing. How would you propose that the rules are changed on this? What would be different about it? Should coaches not be allowed to retire after the national championship? No, that's silly. Should players not be allowed to enter the portal if their coach who promised he'd be there is going to leave? No, that'd be silly. So how would you even suggest or propose a rules change to deal with this situation. I've seen a lot of people say the rules need to change. They need to do something about this. I don't know what you would do. And I'm not necessarily somebody who says that because you don't have a final answer or a definitive answer, you just do nothing. I think that the portal and NIL and a lot of things could use fixing. But the idea that because Bama got screwed, we need to fix everything, we need to overhaul this, maybe don't retire after kids have enrolled. Maybe let people know what's going to go down so that kids aren't put in a bad situation. You think Bama signs the number 1 signing class in 2024 if Saban announces his intentions? Number 2, I'm sorry, I believe they were just behind Georgia. Do you think he signs that good of a class? Probably not. There's probably some doubt over it. And so Bama wanted to sign a good class. They're set up for the future. Kalen DeBoer has a lot of talent there. We talk about Bama's roster getting decimated. It's still one of the best in college football. But do you think they signed that good of a class without Nick Saban? Probably not. You think he convinces as many guys to stick around if he's not going to be there? Probably not. So take the good with the bad. You complained for a month about Florida State being whiners and try to cherry pick things and not just letting the results be what they were. The best part to me probably is the fact that for over a month, they called Florida State's players quitters for not playing in the Orange Bowl. And now 26 of their own roster, plus several recruits that have decommitted, are all quitting on the Tide too. At the end of the day, for Alabama fans, welcome to the rest of what college football has experienced for years. Welcome to some of your better players hitting the portal at times. Now, you haven't experienced much of this. You haven't experienced it year over year over year, but I'd imagine that you still, even in 1 year of it being very drastic and dramatic, you still haven't experienced it as much as most schools have across the rest of the country over the last 3 or 4 years. Your 1 year of experiencing it, though harsh, is still not as bad as other schools have experienced it, where they've lost multiple dozens of commits year over year over year to the portal. Saban obviously held a lot together there. And I'm not saying that Alabama just nosedives and falls off a cliff, but it's hard to think that they won't take a step back. And this roster decimation that's happening at the hands of Florida State and others is the first sign of that. Now, Alabama should still be very good. They've still got way more talent on their roster than most programs in the country. But are they going to be Nick Saban elite anymore? It'd be hard for me to think so. Several difference makers are off of that team now and headed to some of their rivals, headed to some teams that they have to compete against on the trail and the field yearly. And I think we're going to see, I wouldn't say the end of a dynasty, but possibly something very close to that. It was all funny and it was all laughs and it was all ha-ha when Florida State was getting the screws. But now that Alabama's getting it, everyone's upset. And when I say everyone, I really just mean the Alabama fans. What are your thoughts? Should we change the rules for one team? We certainly didn't change anything for Florida State once they got snubbed out of the playoff. Will anything change? Should anything change? And could anything even theoretically change if we wanted it to? I'm here to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you guys for tuning in. I wanted to give you my take on Florida State and the rest of college football absolutely decimating that Alabama roster. I'm here for it. It's enjoyable to watch. No one feels any sympathy for this team that's dominated the last 2 decades. Talk to you guys soon. Go Noles.